Welcome to this week's citizenship lesson, which is all about devolution. So what is devolution? Well, the quickest way to try and figure it out is to have a look at the root word, which is volvere. So when you've got a word with volve in it or volu, it usually links to this root word of volvere, which is Latin for the verb to roll. So if you think about revolving or a revolver, re as a prefix means back or again. So revolve means roll again. Evolve, evolution, evolving. E is the same as the prefix x, which means so to evolve is to roll out. Therefore, what must devolve mean? Where are we rolling if we are devolving in devolution? If you think about de in terms of the idea of descending, what does the prefix de mean? And therefore, what does it mean if we are devolving? We are rolling where? Devolution is the term used to describe the process of transferring power from the centre, which is Westminster, to the nations and regions of the United Kingdom. And the term is derived from the Latin volvere and the prefix de, which means to roll down. So devolution is the idea of rolling down power from a central place to other people. So who is devolved in the UK? Well, examples of devolution are the powers granted to the Scottish Parliament, to the National Assembly for Wales, to the Northern Ireland Assembly, and to the Greater London and local authorities. So you've also got Greater Manchester as well nowadays. So power has been devolved from the centre, from Westminster, to other places. So Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and to some large local authorities. So what is devolution for? Well, in England, devolution is about the transfer of powers and funding as well from national to local government level. And that's important because it makes sure that decisions are made closer to the local people and to local communities and local businesses that those decisions affect. The idea is that if you're ruled solely by people at the centre of your country, those people at the centre aren't necessarily going to understand what your local area needs, what your local issues are, where the funding needs to go in your local area. So by devolving, by rolling down certain powers and certain money from a national to a local level, that can help ensure that local areas are able to benefit more so than they would necessarily from central government. Let's have a look at how power is distributed under devolution. Well, if you have a look in your book, there's a question there about how sovereignty links to devolution. And sovereignty, if you remember, parliamentary sovereignty, is the idea of ultimate power residing with Parliament. And that is the case. So what that means is devolution is in theory reversible. And the devolved institutions are just products of UK statutes. The Parliament has decided you can be devolved, but they could change that at any point. So when we talk about power, it's important to understand that under our current constitutional tradition, that power could be taken away at any point. As it stands, though, we do have devolution, and the UK system is largely asymmetric, which means that different parts of the UK have different forms of devolution and varying degrees of power. So remember those three branches of the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. So those three branches of powers, not all people have control over those. So Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland all have executive and legislative devolution, which means they can make their own laws and they can make sure those laws work and are embedded, policies are written, etc., for people to live by those laws. So Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland can make laws and enact them through their government. Whereas in England, the Mayor of London, Metro mayors, they only have executive powers. So that means they can't make their own laws. They can just look at how they execute the laws that are given to them by the central legislative branch of UK government. So there's another question in your book about reserved matters. What are reserved matters? Well, this links back to the idea of how power is distributed, because in devolved areas, those three legislatures can only pass primary and secondary laws in devolved areas, and then there are reserved matters that remain the responsibility of Westminster. So the UK Parliament can still legislate in devolved areas, but does not normally do so without the explicit consent of the relevant devolved body. So basically there are certain matters in which the UK Parliament can step into Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and say, actually, we would like you to follow this particular rule. This is a new law that we want in place. Those reserved matters tend to link to ideas around employment, around financial institutions and so on, and they are designed to protect regions and areas in different ways. So reserved matters are situations in which Westminster can step back in and say, yes, you're devolved, however, we want you to agree and follow this particular law as well as the ones you've come up with yourself. So local government devolution has been developing gradually over the last 10 years. In November 2014, the government announced the first devolution deal with Greater Manchester, and that was followed by another deal with Cornwall in July 2015. They then invited proposals from other local areas who wanted to think about starting to look at their own executive powers, how they make central government laws and practice work for their local regions. And proposals were invited and they received 34 bids from local areas. So there is definite interest across the UK from local regional areas who are thinking about how they can make central government laws work more effectively for their local area and central government funding work in a different way. One of the questions in your booklet is about levelling up. You might have heard this in the news. It was quite a controversial idea. The principle is decent. It's whether or not it turns out to be what it is suggested to be. But basically what happened is in February last year, the government published the Levelling Up White Paper. And what this did was it set out a new framework for devolution that extended beyond metropolitan areas for the first time. And it set out a three-level approach to devolution that looked at the idea of making devolution more suitable for different regions. There are currently 10 combined authorities, 9 of which have a mayor. And the Levelling Up White Paper invited 10 areas to come forward and negotiate devolution deals. Of these, York and North Yorkshire have agreed a combined authority deal. The East Midlands have agreed a combined county authority deal. The White Paper also set out proposals for devolution to be deepened through opening new negotiations for deals with the West Midlands and Greater Manchester combined authorities, giving these areas the opportunity to bid for further powers. So rather than just executive powers, there might well be in the future more legislative powers perhaps that are granted to these devolved areas like Manchester and the West Midlands. So the Levelling Up White Paper also named 10 areas that would be invited to start formal negotiations, and one of those areas was Norfolk. So it might well be in your lifetime in the future. Norfolk, we're on the fence at the moment about it apparently, but we may well be at some point a devolved authority, which would mean that we might get to have more power over where we spend centralised funding. We might have more control over how we execute legislation in our region, all kinds of things. So watch this space. So that's devolution. It's all about the rolling down of power from the centre to other areas in order to make the management of those areas more effective, and it helps with things like creating better public services, greater growth, stronger partnerships between public sector and private sector, and community leaders in local areas. Thank you very much. See you in a couple of weeks.